Welcome, dear listeners, to the Speak and Flow podcast, where we dive into unique experiences to help you and your team achieve maximum potential and flow. Today is a wonderful day because I have an amazing leader, Roger Noyes. He is transitioning out of Catch and Release as the VP of Operations, and he is here to share the wealth of experience with us to you. And so, hi, Roger. I'm glad you're here.
Hey, Melinda, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you. Yes, let's dive in. What makes you passionate about operations?
Well, I would say right off the bat, it's about solving a problem and helping people, right? Helping an organization, helping teams get better, more efficient, operational efficiency, if you will, even though that's a little bit cliche. But effectively, I think the solving of the problem, right?
Uh-huh.
And helping people get together, right? And become a strong unit and a team, especially in the operations roles, because in operations, operations is one of those things you want to set and forget, right? You just want to make
Yes.
sure that it works, right?
Yes.
And the last thing, the CEO wants is like, hey, how come this thing's not working? How come this tool's not working? How come we don't have this thing done? How come the professional services team isn't executing, right? You want to make sure that the team can do their best work, right? And that's what I hope I'm helping with my past teams and
Mhm.
potentially in the future, right? To really help them become the best that they can be in their roles.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing is, when I think about operations, I think about tools, I think about systems, I think about processes. And in a lot of what the first about helping the people become more efficient. It's about, even though it is tools and processes, but it comes down to how does it help the people?
Yeah, and I think
And
my perspective is I'm a servant leader, right?
I love it.
I don't kind of tell people what to do.
Yes.
I'm much more like, hey, what are our problems? What can we do? How can I help you get there?
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm. And in being in operations, you have so many opportunities to support and help people to help themselves. And in operations, the different teams. Tell us about all the different teams that you worked with, and the teams that traditionally don't work well with each other. What is happening there? Can you paint the landscape of that?
Well, I think it could be depending on the size of the organization.
Uh-huh.
It could really be a lot of different things, right? I mean, effectively, you could be working with sales and operations. You can be working with revenue and accounting and operations. You can be working with product and operations, right? What are the tools and solutions they need, right?
Hmm.
And everybody kind of has an angle, right? They're always like, well, I need this thing for sales because if I can't get this thing, then I'm not going to be able to hit my quota, so on and so forth, right?
Hmm.
Or,
Hmm.
hey, I need this thing for product to enable us to be able to understand what our customers need, right? So we can make the best product we can, so sales can sell, and right, it's kind of like this cycle, and you're trying to piece it all together in a lot of ways.
Right. Right.
And I think I think trying to be as diplomatic as possible when
Hmm.
you do run into issues. Like I
Hmm.
have no problem and I encourage disagreement and
Hmm.
like, hey, if you have a position,
Hmm.
everyone effectively should have a voice on the team,
Hmm.
whether they're,
Hmm.
a senior manager or an individual contributor.
Hmm.
And it might not be like, it's not decision by committee,
Mhm,
but or
mhm,
anything.
mhm.
But I think it's important to say like, hey, if I have a voice and I can share that, right? I do think you kind of have to navigate the folks that have really strong personalities. And that's where
Right.
it's like, okay, well, let's unpack why you feel so strongly about that. And if it aligns with the mission and the goals of the organization or the team or the initiative that you're working on, right? Then it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. That gets attention, right? And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, if you have conflict, right, you're gonna have to figure out how to navigate it depending on the circumstance and the situation. Right? Sometimes you have to take it offline. Sometimes you can address it depending on the subgroup that you're working with. Right. So, but again, at the end of the day, it's, you have to kind of let all of those, everybody comes in, right, to meetings or whatever it might be with, they may have baggage or they might have had a bad day or whatever. So being empathetic to that and saying like, okay, it's clear so and so that, you're really, something triggered you or you're really passionate or whatever. Let's kind of get to the root. Like, what is the root of the problem we're trying to solve? And go from there.
And
So,
do companies, have you been with companies that don't do that very well? And what was happening?
well, I mean, it's easy to get into silos,
Right. Okay.
right?
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah,
And
people end up being in silos.
yeah, and I mean, I've definitely seen that, right? And it's like, well,
Right.
who has the influence? Who has the ear of the decision maker, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And I think the unfortunate part is if people feel threatened by a change, we know nobody likes change. They're like, wait, I was
Right.
doing a thing and I love the way that thing was working out, and now you're kind of making the change, right? And
Right.
help how do you help pitch the vision? How do you help say, hey, there's a reason we're doing this. We're not doing it to make your life difficult, right? We might need to take 2 steps back to go 3 steps forward. So, perfect example. About 2 years ago, give or take, for Catch and Release, we were actually redeveloping our product,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we had a project we were working on for a few years, and then we realized we had to kind of basically restart, right? We had a new tech team, the whole 9 yards. So everybody was used to using that old platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the team, right? All the kind of professional services folks, right? And we knew that it was going to be really painful, right? When that new product came out. And
Right.
it was painful because it didn't have the bells and whistles, right? It was kind of like a quote unquote beta, if you will, or kind of a early release, right? And then we had to rip the band-aid off, right? We like literally had to say, hey guys, this is gonna suck, right?
Yes.
And we're pulling it off, and this thing is going away, and now you got to work in this other thing. And and yeah, there was no illusions, right? It was more
Uh-huh.
work for the team, less
Uh-huh.
efficient, like the whole 9 yards. But then 2 years on, right, we are now flipping the script, right? If
Uh-huh.
we would have stayed with that original platform or whatever, yeah, we'd still be doing that same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now say we were like, oh, we're in a big deficit at the beginning. Now we're 3 or 4 steps ahead in our
Mm-hmm.
efficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we're
Mm-hmm.
meeting the goals that we laid out, and
Right.
really kind of being the cheerleader to say like, hey guys, this is going to get better, or hey,
Right.
what is it that you need? Like, what's your biggest pain point? And we're going to talk to product and engineering, right? And we're
Right.
going to make sure that that big pain point, because that one big pain point might knock out like 10 things, right?
Right.
Hey, if
Right.
you can only just do this one thing for us, right?
Right.
And so that's an example yeah, I mean, it can be challenging, right? And
Right.
there was a lot of chaos, right? And
Right.
it was hard. I mean, there's
Right.
no doubt about it. But did we learn a lot? Like a lot?
What
Yes.
was the most challenging part? You mentioned that people didn't want the change. You have to rip the band-aid off. I enjoy
Yeah.
that you said it was like there was no illusion. It was transparent. It's gonna be hard. And so that
Hmm.
communication is authentic. And so I think people, even though it's
Yeah.
hard, at least it's something that they can feel more clarity on, if that their clarity that is gonna be hard.
I think
And
the
what are the
hard
right, yeah.
yeah, I think the hardest part is is really what I alluded to before, is laying out the vision is and being able to see the forest through the trees, right? Can you see
Mm,
3 or 4 steps ahead, right?
mhm.
A lot of people can't. right?
No,
And
right,
just like their day to day, it's like, hey, this is what it's affecting me now today. Like, and hey guys, this is why we're doing this, right?
right.
And this is, and for some group in the organization, it wasn't as painful. And in
Mm-hmm.
another part, it was like really painful,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that I think is just, it's a necessity. Could we, in hindsight, right? Hindsight's 2020, could we have done better?
Mm-hmm.
Could we have communicated differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? In various groups. Was
Mm-hmm.
there, is there going to be that type of kind of silo? Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's required. It's like, no, I actually have to sit over here without you bothering me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like invest, or basically throw them like, well, it would be great to do this and this and this and this and this,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I got to get the work done, and I got to get to
Mm-hmm.
stage, I got to get to square one,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we can deal with all that other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the
Mm-hmm.
bells and
Mm-hmm.
whistles, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the nice to
Mm-hmm.
haves. So
Mm-hmm.
I hope that kind of helps. Like that, I mean, and I think this is in the startup world, right? In the corporate
Yes.
world, right? It's a little harder. It's a little, things move slower, right? As we all are aware, right? Getting
I think,
decisions
but then
sometimes.
still things are changing rapid. I guess it depends
Yeah,
on what industry, I think too.
yeah.
Yeah.
hmm But
Yeah.
I do
Yep.
think it's like just sometimes those wheels are churning, and having been on the corporate side and saying like, hey, we want to get X, Y, and Z done, right? Oftentimes we were in a commercial product business at LeapFrog, right? We made toys, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the cool things about that experience for me is they ran the whole soup to nuts, right? They
Mm-hmm.
didn't contract out anything. They spun their own
Wow.
chips there, right?
Wow.
Right. They developed all the hardware, right? We did all
Wow.
the, I was in the content space, right? I was helping develop the content for those devices, right? And there was a forcing function, right?
Uh-huh.
You're like, hey, this is going to first onboard ship and it has to be in the stores by X date, right?
Uh-huh.
And so a lot of that was then, okay, now we have to get it all done by X. Otherwise, it's going to miss
Uh-huh.
the date and everybody, then it's just a domino effect, right? And you don't
Uh-huh.
want
Uh-huh.
that. You don't want to be the
Uh-huh.
person holding folks up, right? So sometimes those are good, those forcing functions, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, because well, as long as the team is a relatively functional team, you can get things done.
Yeah,
I
exactly. And
mean, yeah, I think,
I think one
uh-huh,
of the things that in that experience at LeapFrog, working with global teams around
uh-huh,
the world, right? What I would find as a quote unquote buyer, I would go evaluate teams, I would hire teams, right? And they would do the work for us in a if you will, second party, right? Because they were
mm-hmm,
developing content for us. And every group was different, right? About
mm-hmm,
like what was important to them, what were they good at, what were they maybe not so good at. Did you really have to dial in on the communication? Would I have to go to the producer and say, okay, with this is a new team, right? What I'm seeing is you want to make sure that you do X, Y, and Z. This is what their blind side, this is where their opportunities are. Make sure that you're checking in with them once a day. Make sure you're checking in with them 3 times a week, right? And then on the other hand, we had folks that worked on 25, 30 projects for us. And it's
mm-hmm,
like, okay, you know the deal with these guys, right? Make sure that, on the design side, that you're buttoned up because
mm-hmm,
if you have to change it at the end of the day, it's going to create all this swirl, right? Where
mm-hmm,
this other group, right, might be like, change it until the end and we're still going to knock it out of the park, right? Um, but they
mm-hmm.
would be very persnickety about change or fees or those sorts of things, right? Because they weren't quote unquote internal. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because you're saying that at one point, sometimes if there's an external deadline, it kind of forces people to keep the eye on the ball. But
yeah,
then if there's an internal change, there could be like times where they're resistant and because then what I'm hearing you say is it's also like it's team depend like each team is different. And so
Mhm.
taking the time to communicate, understand each team and even each person on the team is so important because but then I'm like wondering how at what point the team, they're still resistant. At what point, if there's no
You need to make a
deadline,
change. Yeah, I
you
mean,
just need to make a
at a
change.
certain point, you're invested in the vision and the goal, right? Or you're not,
Right, right,
right?
right,
So it's
right,
not
right,
like kumbaya until the end of time and we're all gonna
right, right,
be
right,
best
right.
friends. That's not the point, right? You're going to get, if you get enough, it's like, hey guys, you understand this. And hey, if it's not the right thing, I understand. Or
Yeah.
if they're not executing against what they have said, right? What
Hmm.
their own expectations were for
Hmm.
their role and their job and their goals, right? Then you need to step in and make a change.
Yeah. And how do you know when to say goodbye to someone? It's time to part ways.
It becomes so so my philosophy is really to let folks run the show, right? Like I said,
Hmm.
servant leadership. Like you tell me what you need, right? Obviously, under the umbrella of the larger goal, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you're setting those expectations. We're writing your goals down, right? Is that a weekly? Is that a monthly? Is that a quarterly? Whatever it is, right? And are you doing that, right? So
Hmm.
you got to walk the walk, right?
Hmm.
Say something, do what you say what you do, right? And you get to a point where you're like, okay, so and so didn't meet that goal, right? There are some extenuating circumstances. All right, let's see next time, right? So you always want to kind of give an opportunity.
Hmm.
But I think it's like, fool me once, shame on me, fool you once, no,
Hmm.
fool you once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me,
Shame on
right?
me. Uh-huh.
So it keeps happening. If it keeps happening, you just kind of have an instinct. It's like, hey, this isn't working out, right?
Right,
Or
right.
effectively, I've been in situations where I've stepped into teams and it
Hmm.
was very clear right from the start. It's like, this person is not executing. I'm going to validate my instinct on that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then we're going to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then move on. And
Yeah.
do you usually talk to them about it, or how do you handle it?
So usually you get to a point where you're putting the onus on the work, not the
Mhm, mhm.
individual, right? It's
Right,
never
right, right, right,
personal. It's
right,
like,
right,
hey, these are the goals. You met the goals, you didn't
right,
meet the goals. You
right,
said you were going to do this, you didn't do this, right?
right, right,
And then it's a really easy exercise at that point. It's
right,
really
right,
black and white, right? You're
right,
like, this
right,
is working or it's not working. You said you were
right.
going to do this, you didn't, or you said you were
Yeah,
going to do this, and this weird thing happened. Okay, I get it, right? And then you kind of evolve that way, right?
right,
You
right. And
kind
it's
of
more
you
about
kind of
the
know.
project.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
you
kind of
do.
know as well. Are they helping the team grow and expand and kind of continue to meet their goals, or is it like holding back? It's like, why is it always the so and so that doesn't want to
Hmm.
do X, Y, or Z? And I mean, I think we're speaking in generalities right now, but
Yeah, right.
I think you really have to. I think the other thing there is like you just move quick. Like once you get that instinct, you don't let it fester, right?
Yeah.
You basically have to go in and say, we need to make a change. This is probably our best path. And then you execute against
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
right? There's
Hmm.
just, and that's why it's so, another cliche, right? It's like fire slow, fire fast, right?
It's so true.
I mean, it really is. It really is,
Hmm.
right? And
Right,
sometimes you
right. Because
feel, I've been in this, I've had the experience and I've felt the pain, right? Of like,
yeah,
we need to fill this spot.
right.
Okay, we've been talking to folks for 4 weeks and we finally get somebody with it. Maybe it's not 100%, but we know maybe where the gaps are and let's just give it a shot. And then 90 days later, you're like, damn it, should have just kept on looking. Right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
And so having worked with so many different teams and people,
Mhm.
what do you think are the great qualities and characteristics of a team leader?
Well, I think g coming in from my experience,
Mm-hmm.
right, of both having good leaders above me and having bad
Mm-hmm.
leaders above me, right,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to be the best leader that I can be in my growth. I think this this position of like fear, right, and or micromanaging is always a
Yeah.
huge red flag, right?
Yeah.
Because I think was it um like why'd you hire the person if you want to
Yeah.
micromanage them,
Yeah.
right? Basically, if you're micromanaging, you're basically saying, I don't think you can do the work, right?
Yeah.
And to my earlier point about servant leadership, it's like no, like this is why you're on the team, or this is, where we're going to continue to help support you, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
really about having an open mind, always having, for me, it's always been like, hey, if I can walk in and be honest about both my successes and failures to a boss, right? I mean, and they get it, and they're like, I understand, maybe you messed up, or maybe you made a
Mm-hmm.
wrong decision and the impacts
Mm-hmm.
were material to the business or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You kind of have to own it, right? And I think you
Mm-hmm.
have to own it as a leader too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both as an individual and a leader. So I think really just being open about that and honest,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And
So
what
I
do you
think,
think is the challenge, like when they're micromanaging they're not allowing themselves to be open is what I'm saying. Like they don't, it's hard for them to be open because they're focused on the control, micromanaging, being sure of the,
yeah.
try to make sure they get the outcome that they want. And like you said, I mean, because some of these open, more the managers that allow you to make mistakes,
Mhm, mhm.
yeah, I think it's hard because if it affects the bottom line,
Yeah, I mean, there are certain
right?
things that like you kind of have to do, right? It's just essential, right? And it's like you what's that minimum bar, right?
What is that bar? How do I let go of the control? When do I let go
And
and when do I let them?
and
Yeah,
setting that expectation, right? Of saying,
right.
okay, I need
Okay,
this, and this done, right?
right.
And I think the other thing that we haven't touched on, but I think is essential, and I always try and um encourage my teams to think about,
Mm-hmm,
especially in the kind of development space or in the professional services world,
mm-hmm,
is you are going to be more successful with your customers and your stakeholders if you can anticipate and see around the corners, right?
mm,
So, what are the contingencies that you're going to put in place, or what is your, how are you going to deal with both the successes and the failures, right?
mm-hmm,
So, hey, I have
mm-hmm,
a customer that's super upset about something, right? So, how are you going to then meet them where they are,
mm-hmm.
understand what those issues are? Because, again, to my earlier point, sometimes folks, they have all different sort of, they have so many
Reason.
different, like, this is what I care about. And
Yeah,
I know this from negotiating contracts with different
yeah,
folks for a decade and a half. They like everybody cares about different things. I go to 10 different companies and negotiate
yeah,
a master agreement with them, and they will all care about different things.
yeah.
So,
Interesting.
how do you see around that corner and prepare yourselves for the contingencies? There's the bad stuff, but there's also the good stuff, Melinda. It's
Uh-huh,
like,
uh-huh,
holy crap, right? This is a perfect example. Catch and release. What we did there was building a platform to license the internet, right?
uh-huh.
Pandemic comes. None of the production folks can go out and shoot. We went from
Mm-hmm.
0 to 100 in like overnight. I'm telling you,
Oh my
over that
gosh.
weekend, over that pandemic weekend, we were getting calls from people. Can you help us? Can you help us? So, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Right?
Right.
Part of the work there and the contingency was there is like, all right, we got a network. Let's get people on board.
Love
Right?
it.
Let's get them going. So it's not only about like the bad stuff, it's also the
Yeah.
good stuff that you have to have contingencies for. Right?
Yeah, right, right.
So
And how much time and thinking and preparing do you suggest that leaders do on this?
well, I think
Work on
that's
this?
I did think that's primarily our jobs, right? In a
Ah,
lot of ways, as leaders, is to
hmm.
come up with the strategies and say, like, okay, this is what we're gonna chase
Right,
as you're whether you have a monthly or a weekly business review or a
right,
quarterly
right,
business
right,
review, you start to
right,
look at the results and you say, okay, well, what's good and bad, right? I think
right.
part of the struggle, right, when you as a leader is getting data, right? So you get data, you get
Mm-hmm.
metrics. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
are we
Mm-hmm.
tracking? Yes or no?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And part of the growth for members of my team, or there's been some examples of it, is like, yeah, hey, I'm reporting out. Okay, great. We're behind.
Mm-hmm.
Or we're ahead. Why is
Mm-hmm.
that? Right? Do
Mm-hmm.
I understand? If I don't understand, then the person on the ground needs to help me understand. Right?
Mm-hmm.
What led to the fact that we were 20% down or 50% over? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then that says, okay, well, maybe we have to adjust our forecasting and planning because we
Right,
obviously put a
right.
wrong number down, right? And it was because we didn't have the information yet, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
we just didn't do the proper analysis,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe there was a little shell game going on that happens often, right? Um, so
Completely.
so I think it's really important. I mean, that's what we should, as leaders, should be hyper focused on, is saying like, yeah, you can execute, let the team execute.
Right, right,
How do you drive the business forward, right?
right. I
Through
love that. I love that.
forecasting,
Such a
through, yeah, if you have a strong team that can execute, then you can do the work, right? And to my previous point about micromanaging, why would you want to micromanage the teams, right?
yeah, it's so
Let
true,
them
so
do their
true.
work so you can build a business as a leader.
Well, right. And then you can get the data. If they're not doing it well, then you can get the data quickly and then make adjustments and have them adjust and execute
Yeah.
on those adjustments.
Yep. Totally. Totally.
You're
Yeah.
the one in charge of the strategy, the vision, you could talk out the contingency plans for the positive and also the
Mhm,
risk,
mhm, mhm.
but then adjust, have them and execute on those adjustments. I
Yeah.
love that.
Mhm.
That's efficient communication
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than spend your time micromanaging and communicating what they're doing wrong or how they can fix the little things.
And
Yeah.
I think the other thing here, the other part of this is, what tools are we using to
Yeah.
actually fulfill this, right? And
Okay.
being in the operations role, you get a lot of folks coming at you, a lot of salespeople. Hey, I have
Hmm.
this great solution. I
Hmm.
have this great solution. I have this great solution. Yeah, you sit and you talk with them, and you're like, wow, that sounds like a great solution, right? And I
That's
think the
funny.
reality is
Uh-huh.
it's probably there. The solution is probably good for like 10%, right? Now
Ah.
I'm being in general, like I'm kind of doing the broad swath, but
Uh-huh.
it's really important when it comes to tools, right? That you really understand what your problem is, right?
Yeah,
What
and
is
that's not
your
just
tool?
your problem or your department's problem, right? It's like the problem of the entire organization,
Yeah,
right?
I'll give you a great example of tool implementation, right?
Okay.
So we had a system where we it was like a time tracking system, right? But it was also like a project management system as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was all the bells and whistles. It was like the one of the top tiers, right?
Okay.
And here we are, like a small startup, maybe like 10 people, 10 and 15 people
Okay.
that were using it, right? The
Yeah.
organization was bigger than that, but we had a core group that was using it. And one group was using this part of it,
Uh-huh.
and another
Uh-huh.
part, another group was using this part, but it was still X per month, right?
Uh-huh.
For the full suite, and we had
For
to
the
pay
full
for it
suite.
all, and it was, I don't know, it was a lot, right? It was a lot of money. So we're looking at it as like, do we really need this tool, right?
Yeah.
Does it make
Yeah.
sense? And what I did is I went to the team and I said, listen, this seems, first of all, it's super expensive, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to cut some costs, right?
Yeah.
You think we can go out there and find another solution? And
Right.
basically, there were a few stakeholders that would be like, they were actually using the tool and it benefited their day to day. And I was like, do we want to kind of put together a group to check this out and do the evaluation and assess like half a dozen options, right? And we did that and checked in every once in a while, but the team effectively chose the ultimate solution, right?
Mm.
Because they came in and they said, these are, as a team, this is what they did. There was like 4 or 5 of them, and they said, here are the 6 to, tools that we think could meet our needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here are the pluses, here are the minuses, right? Here are the costs, right? And they came down and they kind of figured it out themselves and said, this is the
Mm-hmm.
one we want to use. It was literally 20% of the cost, and it fits 80% of our needs, right? We might need to do
Right.
this other thing over here for some of the project management stuff, but for all the time tracking, right? And all the analysis, boom. And I was like, this is great. And now they're a part of it, right? They made the
Mm-hmm.
decision. So they're going to use
Right.
the tool, right?
Right.
If I buy
Right.
a tool and say,
Right.
hey, team, use this tool, they're going to be like, I got this other way thing I'm doing. And, the adoption and the implementation, right, is always this like, oh, it's going to be a piece of cake and this and that. But unless folks use it, it's not worth,
It's
it's not worth anything,
yeah.
right? So,
Right.
so I think
Right.
that was a a good example of, hey, you get folks and you get the team together, right? And you say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're going to make a change, right? That
Mm-hmm.
is happening, right? That was the
Mm-hmm.
direction. It's not happening. We are not going to
Mm-hmm.
reduce, right? We are not going to pay whatever it was, some crazy amount,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's
Mm-hmm.
find another solution. Great. And within, 3 or 4 weeks, we had that solution, right? So
Nice.
yeah.
Having them be a part of the solution, letting them know that we need to make a change,
Mhm.
and yet like having them find their own solution. And
Yeah,
because
and help
especially what you
participate in
yeah,
that. And
help
then
participate.
then the adoption of it goes through the roof,
Right.
right? So that all the
Right.
teams using
Right.
it, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to, you've made a good decision, and now you're more efficient, right? And now you have better trust and team cohesion,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
at least, it's a marathon, right? Not a race or something like that. What's the
Mm-hmm.
right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like you really just you build on it. I
Right.
had this.
Right.
Oh, anyway, sorry.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, it's so true, right? We want to have them be a part of the solution, and the solution sometimes
Where you
takes
can.
incremental, yeah, adoption into it. It might not be that we use it right away all the time, or but just adopting certain parts of it.
Mhm.
But as long as they end up using it all, because I think most systems, it's especially those big ones, like, do you really need all of that? Do you really need all those bells and whistles?
Yeah,
And pay X amount for it. And then
yeah. I
like,
mean,
and
is
then
it?
sometimes you think you're going to use it,
Yeah,
but then you
and you
end up
don't.
not using it.
Hey,
So I've
I'm
done that too.
guilty. I am guilty
I'm
as
guilty.
charged on that.
I'm guilty.
Like I've
Yeah.
purchased products and
Yeah.
subscription that was like, this is going to be awesome, and it was like,
I
oh, this
know.
is not what I thought it was going to be, right? And you learn
And I
from that.
think there's also a timing. Yeah, there's a learning. There's a learning. Sometimes I think, and with me as a business owner, there's a timing aspect of it too. It may not be the right time because it could be
Yeah,
later
that's a great
on,
point.
but it's just, yeah,
That's a
yeah.
great
So yeah. Well, thank you so much, Roger. I gained so much from this valuable conversation episode around teams,
point.
so much about what it takes to be an effective leader, a servant leader, listening to others, listening to their different needs, being able to manage all the parts to be able to build a cohesive team. And then also thinking about systems, what are the right tools to help the teams be more cohesive, and that means including them as part of the solution. So thank you so much. I'd like to end with what is your one leadership golden takeaway that you'd like the audience to remember?
So for me, it's hands down building trust, and you build it early and often, right? There's a great
Yeah.
quote. So I have two teenage daughters, and
Okay.
for this school year, my wife was like, "Hey, I'm gonna put up a whiteboard. I'm gonna put a quote on it every morning,
Uh-huh.
right? For you
Oh,
guys,
cute.
like going through the
Oh.
days, right?"
Uh-huh.
And this one actually came up the other day, and I was like, "This is perfect for the podcast." And I don't know who to attribute it to. She just put it down
Uh-huh.
on the whiteboard. Trust is built in drops and lost
Mm.
in buckets.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. So true. It can
Yeah,
be spilled, thrown, poured
yeah,
in 1 minute, like out the door. Everything that
totally.
you've taken the time to build the trust on.
Yeah,
Yeah. So really think
because
through
when it
our
really
part.
when you
Yeah.
start to come to loggerheads or whatever the situation is, if you have trust in that individual across
Right.
the table, you're
Right.
gonna work through it.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah. At the end of the day, even though we're butting heads, we still trust each other. We still work with each other. And I think that that's so crucial, especially with our, complex chaos in environment. Things are not going to be, bells and whistles and happy-go-lucky. But
Mhm.
when you have trust, even when things are not going well, you're going to stick together with it. And I'm thinking about all the times in my life when I've had all the people that I trusted, and we weren't in agreement with many things. But then it
Mhm.
was still that trust that carried us through because of all the, like you said, the drops that we put together to build that and keep that foundation and bond.
Yeah, it's a good deal.
So I really appreciate you sharing that and not damaging that with poor decisions and poor communication.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been great. I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you so much for joining. I trust that the audience took away a lot, just like I did. And until I see you next time, audience, I am your sister in flow. May prosperity flow to you, through you, and onto others always. Thank you so much. Take care. Until next time. Thank you, Roger.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Are you curious on how you measure up with your ability to speak in flow? Come grab my free self-assessment at https://speakinflow.com/assessment. And I'll see you on the other side.